Welcome to Living Through History, where we embark on a captivating journey through the events, people and stories that have shaped the world in the 20th and 21st centuries. Join us as we unravel the intricate tapestry of modern history, exploring pivotal moments, cultural shifts, political revolutions, and technological breakthroughs that have defined our contemporary world. In this episode, Pearl Harbor, the Day of Infamy. 5 battleships, 1 target ship and 2 destroyers sunk, 3 more battleships and 3 heavily damaged cruisers, almost a complete strategic victory. This is not the end of a game of Battleship, the classic board game that has entertained generations of kids and adults with pen and paper during boring hours. Instead, it's the terrible tally of the damage in one of the major Pacific harbors just hours after the start of a surprise attack that would go down in history. Pearl Harbor awakens to the sound of air raid sirens, machine gun fire and artillery barrages, the deafening scream of dive bombers, explosions, and the crackling of fires. The Sunday of December 7, 1941, is unlike any previous day in what had been a sleepy outpost of the United States Navy, implementing the fleet in being theory to deter Japanese offensive moves in the Central Pacific. Destruction, desolation, and death are everywhere, from the vast harbor basin to Hickam Island, where a column of smoke announces the destruction of the air fleet. Hospitals rapidly fill with the dying burn victims, mutilated individuals, and all sorts of corpses, while husband Kimmel holds the telegram from Washington that arrived shortly after the start of the attack, ordering him to put the ships on high alert. The combined fleet of the Japanese Empire, in an audacious move thousands of miles from their home bases, has struck with an act of war not overtly declared, except for a delay due to miscalculated time zones. The incredible attack plan was conceived by 2 officers. The highest-ranking one is Isoroku Yamamoto, recently promoted to head of the combined fleet, the core of the Nihon Kaigun, which includes the major aircraft carriers and the fast battleships of the Kongo class. The second is a frigate captain named Minoru Genda, a pioneer of naval aviation in the land of the rising sun. For some time, both have not harbored illusions about the natural outcome of Japanese power politics in the Far East, knowing that Japanese imperialism would clash with the last 2 colonial powers in the region, the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, as well as the United States of America, whose sphere of influence expanded into the Pacific with the acquisition of the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. In 1931, Japan initiated its conquest on the mainland, taking Manchuria, renamed Manchukuo, and turning it into a puppet state with a figurehead ruler, the last Emperor Puyi. 6 years later, skillfully exploiting a series of skirmishes between Nanjing, Beijing and Shanghai, Japan launched its general offensive against a China divided by warlords, the nationalist government, and a communist minority. It was supposed to be a rather straightforward conflict, pitting a modern army against technologically and tactically backward forces. However, the Chinese put aside their previous discord to unite against the invader, putting up resistance. Instead, what hit Japanese interests deeply were the defeats in the north against the Red Army in a clandestine border conflict leading to an armed truce, and the decision by the American government to impose sanctions, starting with an embargo on oil and other derivatives. Without fuel, the war in China risks coming to a standstill, and the Japanese industry could suffer a deadly blow. In military terms, it's a simple calculation. Japan has reserves for no more than 3 years, 4 if production rates and wartime needs are reduced. Political negotiations with Washington to regain access to oil have stalled, as the Americans demand that Tokyo abandon all claims in China and withdraw its troops to defensive positions. However, around Emperor Hirohito, the government becomes increasingly uncompromising, and the hawks prevail over the doves. They want to confront, accepting the enticements that come from Berlin and Rome. Moreover, with the British armies engaged in Africa and the Royal Navy forced to guard routes in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, The Allied garrisons in the south are weak. As for the Americans, their navy is numerically equal to the British, but Roosevelt does not intend to engage directly in the conflict, mainly because domestic public opinion is against it. To succeed in a conflict, Japan needs a significant advantage that guarantees at least 2 years to consolidate its initial conquests. How can they achieve this? Genda has an idea. In fact, the idea comes from a British admiral, Sir Andrew Browne Cunningham, who in November 1940, with a nighttime action, brought the Mediterranean fleet within striking distance of the naval base at Taranto. With only one aircraft carrier and outdated swordfish biplanes, he sank the Cavour and disabled the Littorio and Duilio for months, halving the potential of the Italian battle group. If the British could achieve such a feat, albeit with limited forces, perhaps the combined fleet could do the same, despite the greater distance between Hiroshima and Pearl Harbor compared to Alexandria, Egypt, and Taranto. Supporting Genda's idea is Yamamoto, a high-ranking officer with a rather amusing name. Isoroku means 56 in Japanese, given to him because his biological father had him at the age of 56 when he thought he wouldn't have more children. He is disliked by some of the Japanese naval aristocracy. The older generation doesn't forgive him for being adopted as an adult by a powerful minister who passed on his last name and title, while the so-called battleship clique rejects his tactical ideas based on naval air power. Yamamoto and Genda, along with some trusted collaborators, prepare a plan. The target is Pearl Harbor, where the entire Pacific Fleet is stationed, ready to intervene in the ocean theater. The idea is to move north of the Hawaiian archipelago, evading American surveillance, launching 3 successive waves of carrier-based aircraft, first torpedo bombers, then dive bombers, and forcing the harbor with a few small submarines. The goal is the destruction of supply depots, fuel silos, airports, facilities, grounded aircraft, but above all ships, especially battleships and aircraft carriers. If the operation goes according to plan, the US Navy will take 18 to 24 months to return to a level of efficiency that would allow it to attempt offensive operations. While diplomats continue to discuss the prospects of an agreement, Yamamoto assigns Admiral Nagumo the task of overseeing the expedition and training. To overcome the shallow waters of the naval base, Japanese torpedoes are equipped with wooden fins that allow them to function properly in such conditions. The combined fleet, eluding the reports of Anglo-American naval personnel, disappears from circulation and takes refuge in the southern Kuril Islands, bordering the Soviet Union. Here, pilots and navigators receive their final instructions until on November 26, 1941, the order to sail towards the Aleutians arrives. On December 2nd, a message from Yamamoto reaches the Akagi, and from the Nagato anchored in Tokyo Bay, the senior officer telegraphs Nagumo a coded phrase, Nitaka Yama Noboru, which means climb Mount Nitaka. This is the signal authorizing them to proceed. At Pearl Harbor, no one suspects what is about to happen. The days unfold in their usual monotony with a continuous back and forth of routine activities. Admiral Kimmel is torn between the nerve-wracking exercises and the fragmented and contradictory information from counterintelligence. From Washington, he has been advised to prevent sabotage, so he consolidates most of the aircraft on Hickam Island in the middle of the harbor, while the major ships are anchored in a formation called the Battleship Row. Only his flagship, the Pennsylvania, has not taken its place in the formation yet, as it is in dry dock for some improvements. As for the aircraft carriers, the Lexington had left for Seattle a few days earlier. The Enterprise is tasked with escorting a convoy to Guam and then conducting sea exercises, and the Yorktown had been transferred to the Atlantic long ago. Shortly before dawn on December 7th, the Japanese attack force is in position. The first wave takes off from the 6 Japanese aircraft carriers. The Nihon Kaigun has launched the best it has to offer, with well-trained pilots and experienced officers. The mass of aircraft arrives over Oahu, passing over a radar installation that notes their presence, but the personnel mistake the blip on the screen for a squadron of bombers arriving from the mainland. They don't know what is about to happen, nor do they realize that their error will be the first of a deadly series. After a few alarms during the night, at 6:45, a destroyer is alerted to the possible threat and attacks with depth charges. At 6:53, the destroyer's commander sends an alarm signal to headquarters, reporting that they have sunk an unknown vessel at the harbor entrance. Shortly afterward, the same ship attacks and sinks a second submarine. Admiral Kimmel is informed at 7:40 while having breakfast in his garden. 9 minutes later, the sky darkens. Everything is raining down on the anchored fleet. The Japanese launch torpedoes that hit the battleships, and the old Utah converted into a target ship with a silhouette resembling an aircraft carrier. The Nevada, California, Oklahoma, and West Virginia, among the most exposed ships along the so-called Battleship Row, are also hit by torpedoes. Dive bombers take care of the rest. At 8:06, a Kate aircraft launched from the Kaga descends low and drops an almost 8-ton bomb on the Arizona. The bomb effortlessly penetrates the first two decks between the second 356 mm turret and the command tower and enters the magazine. When the fusée completes its rotation, the explosion lifts and disintegrates the bow of the massive ship, which, engulfed in flames, becomes a true inferno on the water, burning for 2 days and costing the lives of nearly all its crew. The Japanese strike mercilessly at Hickam Field, the Army Air Corps base. Bombers and interceptors on the ground are easy targets, and nothing escapes the destruction on the runways. When the second wave appears in the sky, sirens are still blaring, and the harbor is engulfed in fires. The preferred targets are still the major ships, but also those that were marginally involved so far. And of course, secondary runways, depots, hangars. The Japanese strike hard, almost undisturbed. At 11 Hags, the Akagi sends a reconnaissance plane over Pearl Harbor, and the report is quickly drawn up. There is nothing left intact or functioning. The entire harbor is darkened by smoke. While the police raid the local Japanese consulate, only to find that the staff had already destroyed documents and decoders, Nagumo decides to forego the third wave, saying, "Too risky." Besides, the carriers are not there, and it is useless, according to the old officer, to risk planes and men to destroy the remaining intact shipyards and fuel depots. He doesn't know he is making a grave miscalculation. The American reaction is late and feeble. Apart from the sunken submarines and a few downed aircraft, Pearl Harbor cannot defend itself. Informed of the disaster, the fiery William Bull Halsey launches the Enterprise aircraft in search of the Japanese fleet, but his men return empty-handed because the indication of the fleet's presence south of Oahu is incorrect. Meanwhile, casualties and damage are tallied. The first exceed 2,000, 5 battleships are sunk, and the only one still seaworthy is the Pennsylvania, which has only sustained minor damage, but still needs repairs. The Pacific Fleet is no more. In Washington, President Roosevelt takes the blow and addresses the nation on the radio. December 7, 1941, becomes a day of infamy, emphasizing that Japan delivered the declaration of war an hour after the start of the bombardment, due to a miscalculation of time zones. Public opinion immediately changes its orientation. People want to avenge what has happened. Kimmel pays the price. He is relieved of command and his career ends ingloriously. In his place, Chester Nimitz takes command, introducing a new conservative strategy while waiting to have enough ships to face the Japanese on equal terms. As the Japanese fleet also deals a deadly blow to the British by sinking the modern Prince of Wales and the old Repulse, the American sailors begin to yearn for revenge. None of the ships that struck Pearl Harbor should ever sail again. It will take almost 4 years, but their desire will finally be fulfilled.